investigator on Clarkson's advanced grant. This event is part of the Presidential Speaker Series and is being sponsored by Clarkson STEM Leaf Advanced Program. The program is designed to reduce bias in the STEM fields and is focused on advancing the careers of women STEM faculty. It is now my honor to introduce Clarkson's president, Tony Collins, who has from the beginning been a big supporter of our STEM Leaf Advanced program. Tony. Make sure Tony can hear us, that we were having technical difficulties a little while ago. Tony?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you see me?
No.
Okay, well, that's the best of all worlds. So do you want to go ahead?
Yes, I introduced you, and you can now introduce Dr. Leshin.
Sure, this is probably one of my greatest professional pleasures, maybe even personal pleasures. I think, Laurie's background matches so well with everything many of us at Clarkson aspire to. PhD from Caltech in geochemistry, but then into a professional career across academia and NASA in particular. But more importantly, I think as we look at Clarkson and WPI, where she's been now for 8 years, and the impact she has had in many of the ways that Clarkson wants to move forward. And I, at a personal level, I find her leadership capacity to be immense. I've had the pleasure of working closely with her for the last couple of years at AITU, and I can say that I'm not sure. I said this to her before, so I'm not just creating something for this moment, and that is that her leadership style is firm, with an edge to it, and yet in a way that commands respect and people follow. And so I think more than just the words she's going to talk about aligning our reward system with where we want to go at Clarkson, and it's a great moment for that to happen. But more than just uttering those words around that topic, I hope that people can listen to her and see the kind of style of leadership that the world cries out for: firmness, direction, confidence, and around the topics that are critical to us today. So I can't endorse a speaker more highly. She's highly credentialed, respected around the world in the global STEM field and community, highly respected. Her topic is so pertinent to the world and where we want to all head. And at this moment in Clarkson's time, with a new president coming in and a strategic plan developing, and the emphasis that we've placed on diversity in the broadest of senses, whether that be ethnic, whether that be gender, all of the opportunities that are in front of us, I can't endorse a speaker for this moment at the importance to Clarkson than I can endorse Laurie. And so thank you, Laurie, for being willing to do this. I wish we were there in person. I've got called away to a pretty important meeting. I really apologize. I'm not even going to be able to listen to you. But there's my introduction. Cannot endorse a speaker more highly than Laurie Leshin.
Thank you, Tony. Ooh, I guess I'm getting a little echo there. But thank you so much for that. And right back at you in terms of respecting leadership and incredible impact in the institution that you've led for such a wonderful run. Both of us, I think, are 16th presidents. When I was appointed here, my brother said, yeah, Abe Lincoln was the 16th president, no pressure. So we both have done our best to fulfill that legacy, which of course we could never meet. But thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled. I'm mostly sad that I'm not with you in person, and I've unfortunately never visited the main campus of Clarkson, and would love to have been there. But as Sarah and Laura reminded me, Zoom also gives us opportunities perhaps to engage more broadly across your campuses, and so I'm hopeful that everybody who was interested is able to come, and I'll make a few remarks. I've got a few slides, and then would just love to be in conversation with you all. You're already doing amazing things and producing incredible STEM leaders. And, we've been pushing the envelope a bit here at WPI around what I really refer to as aligning reward systems with institutional values. And I do think a lot of it comes back to values conversations around institutions, and really asking yourself, if there are disconnects, how can we start to overcome those? So I'm going to share my screen if I can. Let's see. Hang on, that's the wrong one. That I think is the right one. All right, can you see that slide? I'm going to just make all of you bigger so I can also see you while I'm speaking. And Sarah, give me a nod. That looks good. Thumbs up. Excellent. Thank you. So this story actually started for me on my very first day in office almost 8 years ago. I walked into my office. This office didn't look like this then, but the same place I'm literally sitting right now speaking to you. And on my chair was a folder. And it all started really, I'm a quantitative girl. So it started with a number. So remember this number, 0. I picked up the folder that was on my chair, and it was the results of our first ever coach survey. I don't know if you all do the coach survey at Clarkson, do you? Yeah, I'm seeing nods, good. It's a great tool. Faculty satisfaction, and they had done it the prior spring before my arrival for the first time. And, the best practice would say you got to release the results, and they wanted to do that, but they wanted me to see it before it went out. And so on my very first day, I walked in and there it was on my chair as one of the first actions to take to say, are you good with us releasing this? And so I said, well, let me have a look. I opened it and pretty quickly jumped out to me that, and here's where the 0 comes in, percentage of female faculty satisfied with our promotion process to full professor. 0%. 0% of women faculty were satisfied with that process. So my first thought was, well, nobody mentioned that during the interview process. Thank you so much. And, and my next thought was, okay, well, that's a pretty clear signal from our community that this is going to be a good area to focus on. And so we leveraged that, burning platform to say, let's just have a look. And so that was kind of one of the first things that we started when I arrived here. And before I jump into a little bit more about what we did there, I just want to share. So this, by the way, this is our beautiful Hilltop campus in Worcester, lovely Worcester, Massachusetts, the second largest city in New England, as our town, our community is fond of saying. I kind of call it the second largest small town in New England because it is a very small town feel, but it's a wonderful community with lots of great higher ed, as I think many of you know. WPI specifically, I think many of you know us because we're in the same space, but we're now, we've grown a lot in the last 15 years or so. We're now over 7,000 students, about 5,000 undergrads, 2,000 grad students. 98% of our degrees are in STEM fields. So, mostly engineering, a lot of science, a little bit of business and other things. But our pride really is, our distinctiveness is, 50 years ago, the faculty literally threw out the entire curriculum and started over with something that they called the WPI plan. Our founding 150 years ago was with this combination of theory and practice. That's literally our founding motto. So taking what you learn in the classroom and the lab and applying it in the world. And from our founding, we've had industry embedded with us and students working directly on real world problems. And that's great. And we kind of gotten away from that over the first century of our existence. So 50 years ago, the faculty threw out the curriculum to create space for more hands-on, globally embedded work, real world work for students. And in the current manifestation of WPI, we call this our Global Projects Program. And we now have something we call our Global School, which is a whole other story that I won't get into. But here are just a couple of examples of students collaborating with local organizations in over 50 communities in 30 countries around the world. Before the pandemic, we were sending well over 1,000 students a year out into the world, We're getting back to that now. Students are traveling again, and we've learned a lot more about how to do these collaborations remotely, which again is another issue. But the students on the left in this picture are working to preserve, historical farming practices in Thailand, working with a local organization on that. And the students on the right, so that the one on the left is is our junior year project, which is supposed to be a project that sort of sits at the intersection of technology and society. So again, specifically working for students to figure out how technology impacts society and how they can smartly interact with and advance societal goals using technological solutions. So not just technology, but also society, very important part of what we do. And then we also have this sort of kind of classical senior capstone in engineering, but we have it for all our majors. 100% of our students do that major capstone project as seniors. And these students on the right are civil engineering students who are working on the expansion of the Panama Canal. Before it was filled with water, like when it was under construction, we actually had students working on literally probably the largest engineering project on the planet, which was really exciting for them, truly life-changing. And what we found is these projects are life-changing for our students. We know they have massive impact on having them take on their own responsibility for their own learning and, all the good stuff that we all know high impact practices. I could go on and on about that, but I won't. But the interesting thing is 50 years later, this project-based learning approach, while originally designed in the WPI plan to sort of be these couple of specific interventions in the education, once faculty see and realize the impact of hands-on project-based learning on students, it has now essentially infected, that's not a great word to say right now in the middle of a pandemic, but in a good way, infected most of our curriculum. More than 70% of classes at WPI are project-based now. That wasn't necessarily an envisioned outcome 50 years ago when the faculty sort of overhauled the curriculum, but it is a fascinating one. And so as a result, what we have are a lot of faculty whose scholarship ends up very integrated with project-based learning, integrated with working with local organizations and communities all over the world, integrated with working across disciplines, because faculty members, while the senior capstone, again, is more in the discipline specific, although increasingly we're doing those cross-disciplinary as well. The junior year project is entirely interdisciplinary. All the teams are made up of students from different majors. They're advised by faculty from different departments. They are not very connected to disciplines at all. And so it has, again, built this high, not just tolerance for, but embrace of interdisciplinary research, interdisciplinary scholarship of teaching and learning, scholarship embedded in communities, different kinds of scholarship than what is the traditionally rewarded scholarship and traditional faculty advancement, faculty reward systems. And in spite of this truly special approach that we have to the curriculum, our promotion and frankly our tenure as well, but right now focusing on our promotion processes, did not embrace that. They were very traditional. And so this was the sort of juxtaposition that we stepped into as we started to look at why were people getting stuck at associate professor at WPI? And we had a lot of people, what I would call stuck at associate. And I don't know if you all have the same issues. We had that. And a lot of women who were doing amazing, amazing work aligned with this part of our mission were getting stuck. And so we took a step back. Oops, let me just come up here. I think I need to do this. So to try and reimagine promotion. So I've already talked about the coach survey. Like a lot of things, we started with the committee and then we had another committee and there might have even been a third committee. I've sort of lost track at this point. Very faculty driven process to kind of look at the issues and take them on. And we updated the criteria. So there were basically three pieces of the promotion process that we overhauled. One is the criteria, one was the review process, and the third was the sort of mentoring. So we do our tenure process got very good marks in coach. People feel really supported on the tenure track here, which is great. They feel completely unsupported once they get tenure, they felt. And so we know we needed a mentoring process there as well. The criteria change, which I think is sort of the most interesting part of this, although the mentorship is also important, and the review process part, so I can comment a little bit on those. But the criteria is interesting. So, we have the teaching research scholarship, very traditional kind of criteria. And what we did was what we were not saying in this case is research isn't important, scholarship isn't important. We're not saying that. What we were saying is what we need to do is broaden the lens on what is considered to be great scholarship. And by the way, this was happening informally anyway. Myself, the provost, we already embraced that, but it wasn't well documented. And we know that really being as transparent as you can about the pathway forward is important. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with the work of Boyer, Scholarship Reconsidered. It's really kind of brilliant, I think. And so here's how we basically adopted broader definitions of scholarship derived from Boyer. So we still require scholarly contributions that have an external impact. So that in many ways is how you judge scholarship, right? That in traditional basic research, it's publications or grants. It had to be externally disseminated. And I'll come back to that in a second. And that those scholarly contributions can be along the continuum of that sort of basic research all the way through other kinds of scholarly work. And we talked some about that. And again, I'm happy to share the longer documents from our faculty handbook now with folks. And again, we have always required, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute, but a good high quality teaching and high quality scholarship continues to be required, but the definition of scholarship is broader. I want to talk a little bit about the external impact and the dissemination. So here's the really interesting thing, right? So for years, because we hadn't been seriously considering broader types of scholarship that were being done at WPI, those scholars were not disseminating their scholarship because they didn't think they'd get credit for it. So here's the really interesting thing that happened, right? A bunch of people who are doing this work in scholarship of teaching and learning or scholarship of application and practice or community engagement are now out at conferences disseminating their work on project-based learning. They're publishing their work. And so it's a great reputation builder for WPI, and it's aligned with our values and what we care about. And it's advancing the careers of these faculty as well. And so it's just amazing to see the shift there. And here's another example, dissemination for external impact. So we launched about 6 years ago now, something we call the Center for Project-Based Learning at WPI. We consider ourselves global experts in project-based learning. We're passionate about it. We know it works because we've been doing it for 50 years with our students. We want to help the rest of higher ed embrace this high impact practice. So here on the right, Chris Wobe, who was an associate professor of chemistry, former head of the chemistry department, associate dean of undergraduate studies. Now she's actually the director of the center, but was one of those people who was stuck at associate. And now she's been promoted, I'm very happy to say. But this is dissemination. They are coaching and mentoring teams from all over the country. We've now reached faculty at something like 30 or 40 other academic institutions that collectively serve well over 1 million students a year. That's external impact and dissemination. And we leave it to the candidate to document how they have disseminated their scholarly work and how the committees should think about evaluating it, right? And that's the other challenge here. So we really give a lot of agency to the faculty coming up for promotion to share their thinking. So that's just one example. And then this was a really fun plot to make. It's the first time I've made it. I made it for this talk. So the dotted line in the middle separates the 3 years before we made this change. And now we're 3 years after we have made this change. And you can see these are promotion to full professor numbers at WPI, and that the change is dramatic. So first thing you notice is just way more people are coming up to be promoted. At WPI, and again, I think it's this way most places, while tenure clock is very set, promotion clock is not. You can choose after a certain period of time usually, but you can choose when to come up for full, and people weren't choosing, or you might have to come up multiple times to figure out how to get through the system. So overall, this actually is a change that has benefited both men and women on our faculty. So men have almost doubled in promotion, but women 6-fold increase in 3 years. of women promoted to full professor. And for 3 years running, on average, we are promoting to full professor more women than men in a STEM institution. I'm incredibly proud of this, and it's extraordinary. Just a few additional things about this piece of the change. So I went and sat with the promotion committee, actually the first year that we were implementing the change, and our promotion process is very faculty governance driven. And so it's a faculty elected committee. And I just went and sat with them to try and sort of hear, how's it going? Like, is it impossible or is it fascinating? Like, what are you seeing? And they said several really cool things. They said, first of all, you know, there are people who are really deserving here who in the past we would sort of feel like we had to like squeak through as exceptions, because there was always sort of exceptions in our promotion process, like, or other amazing contributions, like, you know, off to the side stuff, not central. And they're thrilled to be able to honor the work of those colleagues who they know were deserving, who were previously not encompassed by the criteria. So people like Chris Wobe, who has for years has started our first year project program, our Great Problem Seminar. He Heal the World, Power the World, Feed the World. You know, students jump into project-based learning as soon as they arrive here, solving real world problems. She invented that curriculum, hired all the faculty to do it, and has been, you know, helping to advance project-based learning at WPI for a couple of decades. And under the prior criteria was not being rewarded for that. I sat with the group of, and again, you know how this goes, right? Promotion to full, it's all full professors, and the prior full professors, you know, some of them older gruff guys, and said, you know, what do you think? And one of them very sort of seriously said, well, I have to say, I initially thought we were lowering the bar, but now I see what we're actually doing is broadening the bar. And what a beautiful statement. And it just brought a huge smile to my face, and they understood it. And here's the other interesting thing. We send this out to external reviewers and they're like, wait, what is this? What are your criteria? And so many of them write back and say, oh my gosh, this is amazing and totally aligned with your values. And I really respect WPI for making these changes. I think there's still work to do. To me, our tenure criteria are still quite traditional, and we need to be for you know, teaching and research for faculty who are on the sort of integrated teaching and research track. I'll talk in a minute about a teaching path to tenure that we've recently created. But I think we need to be looking again at broadening scholarship expectations for tenure, especially because, again, on the path, you want to make sure you're creating the full pathway for everyone. So that's been a really exciting change. And now that we're 3 years out from it, to really see the impact of it is great. But we knew that our work wasn't done. And I just want to pause here for 1 second, you know, balance. So we are not a research one institution. We are not trying to be MIT. We really value the balance of great teaching and great research at WPI. A lot of places, I bet Clarkson is more like us. Here, when we see a new field emerge, data science, robotics, engineering, instead of sort of saying, let's start a research center, which is what a lot of the big research universities do, we start by asking, what are the future leaders in this field going to need to know? And how do we create curricula around that? How do we train those leaders of the future? And we really believe that great teaching and great research inspire and reinforce one another. And it was a thrill a few years ago to be recognized for this by the Wall Street Journal and Times Higher Ed, where as one of the handful of schools that do this balance really well. And it's gratifying because they see who we're trying to be here. Like, this is who we're trying to be, and they got it. So that's cool. And our research has grown a lot in my time here. We're up about 140% in the last 4 or 5 years. So it's growing. And as a result, there's pressure on the teaching side of the house, right? And so we have, in order to keep that balance right, we've been increasingly hiring sort of full-time faculty to be teaching faculty. And then we have what we call now sort of dual mission faculty, teaching and research. But I got to tell you, these teaching faculty were treated like crap. I'll just be blunt. They had short rolling contracts, like basically 2-year contracts that renewed every year. So we're like constantly rolling contracts. So no long-term commitment from the institution. They had no voice in faculty governance. Our faculty governance is very strong at WPI, and they were basically told you're not real faculty, like to the point where we defined faculty with a capital F, and like it was offensive, honestly. And they, there was no tenure track. They were all non-tenure track faculty. And we would call them non-tenure track faculty. I think calling people by something they're not is also offensive. So for a long time, we've been having this conversation. And by the way, it's much better than it used to be. They used to be sort of hit way before my time. They were sort of staff, and now the whole thing is very weird. So they have been working on this issue for a while. But it's kind of come together in recent times to think differently about our teaching faculty because of wanting to hold this balance, right? And because it's the right thing to do for these folks who are overwhelmingly teaching at our project centers, teaching our first year project courses, like involved in delivering the essential components of what makes a WPI education unique. We need to recognize them. And we very much, the board, myself, very much wanted to make sure their voices were being heard in our governance conversations as well. And so we started working between the board, the administration, and the faculty governance, but also what we now call our teaching and research track faculty, TRT faculty, instead of non-tenure track faculty, on how can we do some of this. And so we came up in the end with this sort of three-legged stool plan. So you see the stool on the right. One is that a certain fraction of our teaching path faculty will be offered the opportunity to be on a tenure track, which is a teaching track to tenure, not the dual mission faculty, but recognizing and supporting that there are faculty whose passion is teaching and who, on that track. The second is longer term contracts for those who were not able, I'm sorry to say we are not able to give tenure to everybody. The tenure track faculty's first response was, great. If you want them to participate in governance, just give them all tenure and then we'll be good. And, as much as I would love to do that, I'm a tenure faculty member. I'm a big advocate of it. Some flexibility on the part of the institution is needed. And so we've got to balance all the forces there. Longer term contracts, though, especially for those who are, longer term committed to WPI, we want to return that commitment. And so the idea of stepping up the length of commitment to teaching track faculty over time is something that we embraced. And then finally, full participation in governance, what I call the full enfranchisement of our TRT faculty colleagues. And it took, again, a couple of years, probably 3 years, actually. But we've gotten that done. And so now, and again, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this pie chart, but you can sort of see the breakdown here as of right before we implemented this, that, the vast majority of our faculty are tenure track. We had this decent slice of pie that is the teaching and research track faculty. There are some people like instructors, professors of practice, professors of like pure research track, sort of soft money folks who are not eligible for the teaching track to tenure. But our commitment is that over the coming few years to have sort of up to half of this pie wedge, the dark orange one, those faculty be able to join the teaching track to tenure. And then for all of the others to have longer term commitments from the institution that will guarantee that no one is let go for speaking out. So essentially guarantee academic freedom. And that really was important to our faculty governance to enable them to have full participation in governance so that nobody was afraid about losing their job for speaking up, right? Which was never the intention, of course, but that was needed. So we document it in the longer term appointments. So I included here, and I'll share these slides with you all afterwards so you have it, but this is now a different set of tenure criteria than our dual mission, teaching and research mission faculty, who, again, this is focused on teaching practice. And we had a lot of debate about, is there any scholarship requirement for teaching path to tenure? We came up with this idea of professional growth and currency. So that could be a little scholarly work. It does mean that you are continuing to engage with a broader community outside of WPI to make sure you stay current. And we provide a little bit of funding for folks to to make sure that's possible. And of course, service. Just to say that, again, this approach, we just found out recently that we received this Delphi Award from USC for innovation in sort of faculty support in higher education. And again, we're getting a lot of great media attention for it, because this challenge of the sort of adjunctification and the non-tenure, growth in non-tenured faculty is a real issue in higher ed. And we're just doing our very best to try and balance the needs of the institution and the commitment to individual faculty members. And I think we've hit on a really good thing here. It's our very first year. We appointed 15 teaching faculty onto the teaching path to tenure this year. And so we're going to work, I don't yet have a diagram like the one I showed you for the promotion criteria, but we're very excited to work with those faculty to successfully navigate the process. We're taking the very best among our existing teaching faculty initially and offering them this opportunity to be on the tenure track. And, we're not going to make them all wait 6 years to get tenure, because some of them are very mid-career, but at least a few years, and while we get our process fully in place. And I'll just close out before we open up for discussion by, I figured, okay, what advice would I give? I think all of this is fairly obvious, but I'll just walk through it very briefly. So, aligning stakeholders early and often. And again, this was the hardest part, is just keeping everybody informed, on the same page, working collaboratively and collectively. Everybody likes to kind of go off and do their own thing. I'm always trying to say, no, we've got to do this together if we're going to do it successfully. And that included, by the way, our TRT faculty, our non-tenure track faculty, who for the first time really had a strong voice in this process. And that was a change for our faculty governance leaders, our tenure track faculty, our tenured faculty, and a positive change for the institution. And it really set the stage for their full participation in governance. In terms of, data, again, that 0 really was a great way to help create urgency on the promotion stuff. I think the rise of and our focus on equity and inclusion really finally was the thing that put a lot of our faculty over the top of saying, all right, it's time that we do something about our teaching faculty and make sure they're being treated equitably and have a full voice. And so it can create this urgency, but as you all know, balancing urgency and patience, I will say this is not one of my strengths, as I think Tony was trying to tell you, but it's really important here. These are big changes, and this kind of work on campuses is really hard. So looking back, I would say the fact that it took probably 3 years to do each of these changes is worth it. You're setting up the institution for long-term success, and having people be able to sort of rotate in and out of this, and lots of participation over the time it takes to get somewhere is well worth it. Unintended consequences. Again, the first proposal from the faculty was give everyone tenure. That was not going to work at the institution, but really starting to think through, well, how much flexibility do we need? And what's the thinking there? So you have to be willing to think about unintended consequences in all directions. By the way, I think one of the great consequences of this is likely to be, we have fairly low turnover in our faculty, but for our non-tenure track faculty, we had reasonably high turnover. And I think this is really going to help with that consistency for our students and quality there. Operational needs, additional needs. So our poor promotion committee is overwhelmed with cases, and this is a great problem to have, but you do have to think about, do you need some teaching release for people or other ways to support folks for implementing these fairly significant changes. And then lastly, I'll just say, we all have to be ready to share the credit of this. I'm here talking to you about it, but it really is a shared accomplishment between our faculty, our administration, and our board. We all had to be aligned in order to do this. Our secretary of the faculty, who is a great faculty member here at WPI, often likes to set things up as it was a big battle, and it wasn't a big battle. Like we had the normal level of battle, but I'm fine if he wants to talk about it as like they fought and won. Fine, this is just the way sometimes these things go. So I'm thrilled with where we've landed. And I think there was a lot of give and take. We all stretched in ways that made us slightly uncomfortable. And that's a good thing for WPI, because again, we're keeping at the center, what the institution is about, what the institution values. And then the last thing I'll just say, and maybe I'll stop sharing here for a second, is the National Academies is talking about this a lot right now, alignment of incentives and values. I've chaired a couple of convenings with them. So there are some outside resources as well. I can send you a couple of links about that. We just did a convening right before the pandemic on this topic. And then we did one during the pandemic that was sort of more like through the lens of 2020. And I think time is right. These are hard systems to change. When we talk about systemic bias, when we talk about systemic racism, when we talk about, systemic challenges, these are the systems that we're talking about. These are the systems that need to change to embrace more diverse thinking about the work that we do. And when that diverse thinking aligns with the values of the institution, you can get there. So maybe I'll stop there and open it up to any questions, but thanks for asking me to come and talk about this, and happy to hear from all of you and see how I can help.
Thank you so much. We can get us started off with a couple questions in the chat. Sue Powers asked, and I think you might have touched on this, what are the scholarly expectations for teaching track to tenure faculty?
Yeah, so we don't have a scholarship. And again, I'll send the slides so that you all can have this. It's about professional growth and currency. So, so here, I'll just read you again what's on the slide. Professional growth refers to developing knowledge, acquiring skills, or accumulating experiences that enhance our educational mission and visibility. So again, these are teaching paths to tenure. It really comes back to advancing our educational mission. The currency, the professional growth and currency, the currency refers to making intellectual contributions to and remaining active in professional communities, both within and beyond WPI. So again, that's starting to sound a bit like scholarship, but again, it's not. We expect you to publish papers in your field and things like that. It's about contributing to communities of scholars in teaching and learning. And candidate must be committed in a manner that has significant impact on teaching and learning networks and support systems, on approaches to an understanding of teaching and learning, or of one's own scholarly discipline or scholarly communities. So again, there's room in there for discipline-specific scholarship, but again, the expectation is really around engaging with communities of practice or communities of scholars around teaching and learning. But we do not have sort of, you got to go get grants and you got to write a bunch of papers. Like it's really not, that's not a big part of the criteria. That's a good one.
Yeah. Liz Chapman, how and or by whom is the quality of teaching evaluated?
I love this question. A little bit TBD, I would say. So to me, one of the most interesting things about this moment is that, we claim that we are a place that values great teaching and great research. There are many ways to evaluate research that we all know. We have not embraced, I would say, a lot of good evaluation approaches for evaluating great teaching. And we need to. If we say this is what we value, we've got to figure out how we know what good looks like. And so it's something this process of creating the teaching path to tenure has forced us to really reckon with that. And I think what we're going to see is us getting sharper about some tools and techniques to use. Again, we've got lots of confidence in our ability to know great teaching, but we aren't really quantifying it in ways that I think we should. And I would hope that then that would also start to bleed over into the dual mission faculty, the teaching and research faculty on the tenure track as well, because if we say teaching is important to us, we need to be willing to do some things beyond student evaluations to evaluate it. And we're still grappling with that, I would say.
And then the last one in the chat before we get to Andrea Farrow. This is from Katie Kavanaugh. How are faculty supported in their educational research? Do they have graduate students doing research in teaching and learning?
Not so many yet. I would not be surprised if you came back here in 5 or 10 years and we had growing graduate programs in teaching and learning. We do have a very strong Center for Teaching and Learning on the campus, led by the way, one of these faculty who was a fabulous faculty member, long time, who was stuck at associate and is now a full professor and is a superstar. And they're constantly doing sort of programming, cohorting, bringing people together to collectively work on that. And we are providing sort of small funds for people on the teaching path to tenure to attend conferences, to engage in that work. But again, I expect this, we're in the first year of this. I expect this is going to continue to evolve. And I think it'll be quite interesting to see how. I'm shocked that a place like WPI that so values teaching does not have an engineering education program, for example. And, you know, and we do learning sciences and technology. We've got a huge push in that area, not so much at the college level, a bit more K-12 focused. And we also have a strong K-12 STEM education center, as I'm sure you all do, working with teachers and students in the K-12 arena. But I think that there's a lot more opportunity there to focus on community embedded learning, on, you know, innovations in STEM learning education, engineering education and such. So I think we'll start to see that as things evolve. I see do teaching faculty receive startup packages. So smaller than the dual mission faculty, but we are giving them small startup packages, yes. Don't ask me how much, I can't remember. Small, it's not a ton. And I think the idea is to actually give them sort of professional development money more frequently than just at the beginning. Do you want me to sort of call on people, Andrea, don't know which, sorry.
Andrea's good, but
Okay.
Either way, Andrea sounds nicer. So I'm so excited to hear you talking about broadening the lens on scholarship. And, you know, you say the time is right. I think both for this, you know, understanding the teaching contributions as well as this sort of broader scholarship. It's a huge issue in my field in environmental engineering. Many faculty not getting tenure or not getting promoted because they're doing sort of community engaged research or sort of not traditional scholarship. And I've been focused on this issue. I just wrote an advanced proposal with faculty from across the country to address this, as well as on a committee with the Association for Environmental Engineering and Science Professors to address exactly this. So it's so exciting to hear you talk about it and see your success. Of course, I want to, you know, to see the longer descriptions of what you have for the promotion process. So that would be great. But I also could use some advice on, you know, how do you shift people? You know, you talked about the person on the promotion committee that said, okay, I thought it was, you know, going to be lowering the bar, but not broadening the bar. How do you get there?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think it was a lot of conversation, and I will tell you that we went through several iterations before we landed where we did with the main shift being a broadening of the definition of scholarship. There was an initial push to say, well, we should just let people who are great teachers, you know, and the thought was really, no, we need people to be disseminating their work beyond, you know, this scholarship in some ways is very reputational for an institution, right? And so you can broaden the definition of scholarship and you can broaden your thinking about how to disseminate it, but having it be only internally focused was not okay. So I think that helped to shift it a bit to say, you know what, this is a broader definition, but it's still about, you know, broader impacts beyond the institution. That's what research does, right? It takes you to impacts beyond the institution. And I think that helped. And then the other thing I would say is if you all are moving in this direction, I'm happy to connect you to some of our faculty who could probably give you a little bit more of a frontline view of how they're thinking about it through our provost or our deans. You know, who are big champions of this. So we'd be happy to keep the conversation going, and good for you for working on it nationally as well. I think this is so needed across so much of higher ed. This is, this is part of how you tear down the ivory tower. You start to reward people who do, people who really are doing their scholarship embedded in communities and helping people every day. So,
Thank you.
yeah. Okay, I see in the chat, Kathleen, how do you get faculty to buy in to try PBL and to abandon their traditional approaches to the classroom? At this point, we are so committed to it here that we probably bias on it in hiring. So I'm not sure I'm the best person to answer it, because I think that question here, like that shift happened probably 20 years ago. But so we do tend to buy, a couple of years ago, we got a chemistry professor. We hired a young professor of chemistry who had an offer from us and from Chicago, which was like, what? We're competing with the University of Chicago. And she's like, I want to teach undergraduates. I want to be engaged in this project stuff. That's what I want to do. And so it's a little bit of that. You can bias your hiring some to align with your values, right? It's not saying like, this is what we stand for and what we believe in. And project-based learning is a big part of that. Non-traditional learning is a big part of that. And so we want to make sure we find people who are aligned with that value. And then we do a lot of sort of training, professional development opportunities, groups of faculty working together and learning. I think it's not for everybody, and I will not say 100% of our faculty do this and do it well. I do think, for us, the project centers, like the opportunity to go spend 7 weeks in Copenhagen teaching. So the way this works for most of our students is we send cohorts of 24 students, 6 teams of 4, plus 2 faculty members go to a project center for a 7-week term. Our terms are 7 weeks. We have 4 7-week terms. And again, the term system was built to allow this dedicated project time. It's the only class a student takes when they do that, when they go away. The equivalent of 3 courses full time. So they go to Copenhagen, or they go to New Zealand or Australia or Puerto Rico or Costa Rica or China. It's a pretty interesting thing for a lot of faculty. Not all faculty can do it. And I think especially faculty with young families, like it can be challenging, but as faculty get more senior in their careers, I think many of them see it as a real perk. And so they lean into learning kind of how to do this. It's the traditional approaches. It's not even, I think, so much that it's going to being the guide on the side rather than the sage on the stage, right? A lot of us, I think it's very hard to let go of your expertise, because frankly, a lot of these projects are not, I study rocks on Mars. Okay. That's my expertise. That's not what I'm doing when I go to Cape Town on a project center trip, right? And so there is a lot of that sort of humility, I think, that comes with learning it. I don't know. We've somehow managed it. I do think it's one of the hardest things when institutions are trying to take on project-based learning. And that's why we actually suggest a lot of them start with the freshman type project course that we have. We coach a lot of people in what we call the Great Problem Seminar. It's a good way to sort of dip your toe in. It's usually, again, team taught by faculty from 2 different departments. It's a great way to get your feet wet. And by the way, you can send teams of faculty, 4 or 5 faculty, to our Institute on Project-Based Learning in the summer that our Center for Project-Based Learning runs. And we're thrilled to work with anybody who wants to work with us. Yeah. Yeah, service. I'm looking at the chat, Devin. Thank you. Service is another important component, and it's not often distributed equitably. Yes, yes, and yes. How do we do that? Probably not nearly as well as we need to. I think service is still the kind of underestimated component of all this, and it's very inequitably distributed, especially service in support of goals around equity and inclusion and diversity and social justice, where those service elements tend to very specifically fall on faculty of color, women faculty. And so Yeah, I wish I could say, I think we're doing that perfectly. I don't think we are. And I think it's a huge challenge. Again, the academies have been putting out reports on the importance of mentorship. Mentorship gets like no credit, not here, but just generally is a big problem. I think to me, the thing that our promotion process has shown us is, we don't have to define everything perfectly. We giving a little bit more flexibility to faculty and how they describe their scholarship, how they describe the dissemination, how they would suggest it be evaluated, maybe a model for how we think about these things. And maybe we need to be thinking about any individual faculty member may have a different balance of those elements, and let them tell us sort of what their balance has been and why the institution should think it's important to enable faculty success with some different balances of the three component areas: teaching, research, service. I don't know. It's not an easy question. Uh-oh, did somebody have Jen? Did you want to ask something or? No.
But I'll wait. Hi, it's good to see you, President Leshin.
Hey, hi.
I'll wait. Go ahead and answer everybody else's questions, and I'll ask if we get a lull. Thank you.
How does WPI assess academic advising by faculty? Is it teaching, service, or both? Oh no. So I wasn't faculty here before I became president, so I'm probably not going to get that one right. And again, but we can get you the answers to these questions. If somebody can capture the chat for me, I can just make sure we send you the things. And same for what's the communication look like to external reviewers. I haven't seen it, but I hear about the results of it, but I don't send the letters. It actually comes, our faculty governance actually really runs the review process for faculty. Our provost isn't even really in charge of it. It does ultimately come to him, but yeah, so we do share our new approach with them, but I can get you the examples of how. Okay, Jen, I think it's to you.
Okay, sorry, I'm trying to do many things at once in terms
That's
of, there's
usual.
a wonderful background chat and text coming in, so it's a real testament that everything you've been talking about is igniting people. The focus of this, and I think you just alluded to the question I was going to ask, was, of course, our focus has been women, right, overall. But within the STEM Leaf Advanced Grant, a real key part of that is the intersectional identity of those women, right? So women of color. And of course, I see the potential in this in terms of looking at how we're taking, marginalized groups of scholars and bringing them back to the center. And so one of the questions that I had is have you been able to look at this in terms of scholars of color? And has this been something that's been helpful, and how has that been a part of the process in using the multitude of lenses that intersectionality brings?
We are starting to, I would say we're still in our early days, and frankly, our numbers are so low that it's really hard. Like I couldn't make a histogram like that because the numbers are just so low. I can tell you a couple of faculty of color have been promoted since we changed the promotion criteria, which is great. And also many times our teaching faculty are more diverse than our teaching and research track, our dual mission faculty. And so the teaching path to tenure looks more diverse than our dual mission faculty tenure track. So both of those things, I think in the long run will be positive. But I think we need to ask ourselves some more questions about intersectional faculty and whether we are truly supporting their work. And especially when it comes to mentorship and service, I think that's really where a lot of it does show up. I always think back to, this Academies convening we ran back in the days when we used to all be together in person. Yay. Hopefully to be back very soon. We had some breakout groups, and one of the women in the group said she had just joined the tenure track. She was, maybe late 40s, early 50s even. And she said, and you know what, I have to say I'm miserable because now all the stuff that I actually value doing isn't actually valued. And it's just, it's such a sad thing, right? Like that's not okay. We've got to figure out how we build a system that not just includes everyone, but values these contributions, right? And that's going to take a little bit more time, I think. But I'm so glad that groups like yours are thinking about it and pushing on it every single day. I would say we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the much friggin' better. And so like, we should keep going forward and make these changes as we can, and then keep refining. I do worry, and our faculty fall into this. Sometimes they want it to be perfect and they want everything to be unanimous, and that's great. But at some point we've got to be willing to say, let's try this and let's see, and let's be willing to look, and let's be willing to assess and course correct along the way. So that's what we're focused on now. I think what we're seeing with the promotion criteria is some dramatic success. And I think we're going to be learning a ton over the next 3 or 4 years with the teaching path to tenure and other commitments to our teaching faculty. So maybe I'll come back in a few years and share more, or somebody else from WPI can.
We love to have you back.
Thanks.
We're right at noon. Thank you so much for letting us have some of your time today. And we will get together with you about the chat and resources and make sure everyone has everything.
Great. And yeah, send me a note, Sarah, and then I'll shoot you my slides, and then we can think about some other resources to share as well.
Perfect. Sounds good.
Nice to see you all. Thank you for tuning in.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you. Sarah, have you turned off the record yet?